Good evening. It's Thursday, the 31st of October. Our top stories. Record floods leave at least 95 dead in Spain, with fears more bodies will be found as the cleanup begins. Parts of Taiwan shut down as Typhoon Kongray makes landfall, cutting power to nearly 500,000 homes. Pacific leaders float an Australian-backed peacekeeping force to quell tensions in New Caledonia. And the LA Dodgers beat the New York Yankees to win the World Series, keeping Japanese player Shohei Ohtani in the spotlight. You're watching The World. Hello, I'm Girish Sawlani. Good to have your company. Also tonight, we'll take a look at what's behind China's crackdown on Halloween. But first, as the sun rose in Spain a few hours ago, the extent of the devastation from flash flooding was laid bare. At least 95 people have been killed in what could be the deadliest flooding in Spain's history, with death toll expected to rise. A year's worth of rain had fallen in just 8 hours in parts of Valencia, wiping away cars and buildings in a deluge that caught many by surprise. Well, for more, we are joined from Barcelona by our Europe correspondent, Catherine Dis. Catherine, good to have you with us today. What can you tell us about the extent of the devastation caused by these record floods?
Good evening, Girish. Well, please excuse me coming to you from my tiny hotel room here in Barcelona. The situation to the southeast of where I am is still very much an unfolding situation. We understand that the rain has eased and the floodwaters are starting to subside there, which is really giving emergency crews the ability to be able to carry out their search and rescue operations easier than what they were over the last 24 hours. They're hoping to be able to find more people who are still missing in those flooded towns and villages to the southeast of here. Hundreds of soldiers have been deployed to help find those feared missing. Some places can only be reached by helicopter. So this is a really, really serious situation down there. And some of the pictures that we have seen, Girish, show very desperate scenes where people have been climbing atop roofs, also cars. We've seen rescue crews in helicopters winching people to safety as they've clutched on to their pets. The devastation that has been experienced down there, we're seeing that the floodwaters were up to rooftops in many parts of the region. Streets have caved in, a high-speed train was derailed, and bridges have collapsed. So really the devastation has only become clear there as morning yesterday, but there is still more rain expected down there. We've heard from the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. He has declared 3 days of mourning and urged residents to not become complacent because more wet weather is on the way.
Entera llora con todos y con todas vosotros.
The whole of Spain is crying with all of you. Our absolute priority is to help you. The public administrations are working. We're working in a coordinated manner to make this possible, and we're going to provide all the necessary means today and tomorrow and for as long as it takes so that we can recover from this tragedy. We're not going to leave you alone.
And of course, these floods caught many by surprise. Are residents angry about the lack of warning?
Yeah, they are. As with many tragedies, I'm sure you would be aware of, grief and hope does quickly turn to anger. And there are accusations that Spanish authorities just simply didn't give people enough warning of the impending disaster. The Civil Protection Agency here in Spain, which is deployed during these types of situations, didn't actually issue an alert for the disaster until 8:15 p.m. on Tuesday night. And by this time, many villages in in that region were already well underwater and had been for a few hours. That, of course, meant that people weren't able to get off the roads or move to higher ground with any sort of notice. And there is criticisms being laid at the Spanish government for disbanding a local disaster relief agency that was based down in Valencia. So they're the sorts of stories that we're hearing emerge from people who are down in that region.
And Catherine, given the record levels of the rainfall, has this disaster given rise to discussions surrounding global warming?
Yes, it most certainly has. This was an extraordinary amount of rain. Let's just cover that off. More than 490 millimetres fell in just 8 hours in that region, in most of it actually within just 1 hour. That's close to 20 inches of rain. And this was caused by a fairly common weather phenomenon called Dana, which happens when cold air moves over the warm Mediterranean Sea. That causes the hot air to rise and quickly form into dense water-laden clouds, which then hangs over the area for a while and increases in intensity. So whilst these systems are common during autumn in this region, particularly in Spain due to its location between the North Atlantic Ocean and also the Mediterranean Sea, meteorologists are saying that the intensity and frequency of these types of systems are increasing as a result of rising global temperatures and climate change. So very big questions here on the ground in Spain over just how quickly authorities raised the alarm with residents on the ground. And I'm sure that it will be a tense few days here as the rescue efforts continue and if that rain does eventuate in the next few days.
Okay, Europe correspondent Catherine Diss, thanks very much for that update. Taiwan has almost completely shut down as Typhoon Kongray makes landfall. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled and all Taiwanese cities have declared a day off for residents. Strong storm conditions first hit the country's mountainous east and is now affecting much of the island. The Taiwanese government has mobilized 36,000 military personnel. Pacific leaders have flagged an Australian-led police peacekeeping force that could maintain calm in New Caledonia as tensions between pro-independence groups and the French government remain high. Leaders from Tonga, Fiji and Cook Islands have spent 3 days touring New Caledonia on a fact-finding mission after deadly riots rocked the French territory earlier this year. They've suggested an Australian-backed Pacific police contingent could be deployed as a peacekeeping force to prevent the outbreak of further violence. But France's ambassador to the Pacific said it was unlikely they would accept the proposal. Thousands of French police remain on the ground in New Caledonia after being sent there to respond to the riots that began in May. Lebanon's prime minister says he's hopeful a ceasefire deal can be reached between Israel and Hezbollah, which could lead to a 60-day pause in fighting. Israel has launched heavy airstrikes on Baalbek in southern Lebanon as it expands its attacks on what it claims are Hezbollah strongholds. Lebanon's health ministry says at least 19 people have been killed, with the Israeli military ordering the entire city to evacuate. The escalation comes as the White House sends officials to Israel for talks amid reports of a draft ceasefire plan put forward by Washington.
We want to get to the point where we have a ceasefire and a diplomatic resolution. We are not calling for one right now. What we are trying to do is structure such a diplomatic resolution with all of the relevant parties.
South Korea's military says North Korea has test-launched a suspected long-range missile designed to strike North America. If confirmed, it's North Korea's first test firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile since December last year. It comes after South Korea warned that troops from the north are preparing to join Russian forces in Ukraine, prompting the U.S. to urge Pyongyang to withdraw them. The U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has spent the day trying to distance herself from remarks made by Joe Biden. The president has been accused of referring to Trump supporters as garbage, the same language a comedian used to describe Puerto Rico at a Trump event on the weekend. Now it's been seized on by the Republicans, with Donald Trump donning high vis to dump on the controversial comment.
Making a point with the help of a giant new prop.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden.
Donald Trump drawing more attention to a known goal by the Democrats.
The crooked Joe Biden finally said what he and Kamala really think of our supporters. He called them garbage. No way. No way.
The president's off-the-cuff remark was in response to a comment made at a Donald Trump rally, where a comedian described the US territory of Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable.
Joe Biden argues he was referring to the comedian's rhetoric, but his vice president was forced to try to limit the fallout.
Let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
It's a new headache for Kamala Harris's campaign, especially as she tries to woo more Republicans like Justin Warren, who's decided to switch sides at this election.
That was a terrible statement. I'm not going to try to explain why he would say that. It could have been a slip or a gaffe on his part. That's wrong.
Whether or not this latest controversy ends up having a meaningful impact on the campaign remains to be seen. But for the Vice President, it risks undermining her message to voters that she's the candidate who'd unite Americans.
Joe Biden's comments are being compared to Hillary Clinton's infamous description of Trump supporters as a basket of deplorables.
He says garbage. I take offence to that.
A message being driven home in the final days of the campaign. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
In federal politics, the heat over free flight upgrades and lounge club memberships has blown back on the opposition. Peter Dutton has had to clarify a claim he'd never called mining magnate Gina Rinehart to request access to her private jet, now admitting his office did inquire about whether the plane was available before accepting a free ride. But the Prime Minister has also had to issue a clarification of his own.
The Prime Minister hoped he'd reached the end of a turbulent week, but even after denying he'd ever called Alan Joyce seeking an upgrade, questions remained.
Do you know whether he had other communications with Alan Joyce?
Why is he kind of like Slim Shady on this issue?
Well, he's not Slim Shady at all, Carl. He's declared all of these flights.
The Prime Minister's office then confirming he didn't request free upgrades from anyone at Qantas via any form of communication.
We find out this morning that the Prime Minister's clarified the clarifying statement.
But delving into the Prime Minister's decade of declarations has opened a can of worms across the Parliament.
The Liberals have been holding themselves out to be pretty pure and pretty holier than thou, but then it turns out they've got problems.
2 years ago, Peter Dutton flew on billionaire Gina Rinehart's private jet to attend this Bali bombing memorial. It was declared, but on Tuesday came under question.
Have you ever personally asked Gina Rinehart to fly around Australia?
No.
Today,
the cheaper option for the taxpayer was for my office to speak to Mrs Rinehart's office as to whether the plane might be available.
And opposition transport spokesperson Bridget McKenzie first claimed she'd never accepted an upgrade, then admitted she'd received one. Now she's asked the major airlines to check if there's more.
As soon as I understand the nature of the discrepancies, if there are any, then I will be updating my declaration.
Parliamentarians across the chamber have long lists of declarations: free concert tickets, sporting games, travel and dinners. Part of the job? Perhaps, but also a window into who has their ear. Some are now questioning whether an independent examination of perks for politicians is needed, and possibly an overhaul of the rules. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
There is renewed hope that an 8-year-long war in Yemen will come to an end as Houthi rebels have reportedly agreed to a UN-proposed peace plan. Houthi-controlled media in Yemen say the Iran-allied movement is willing to sign a UN roadmap for peace if Saudi Arabia is serious about ending the conflict. The plan includes both sides implementing a nationwide ceasefire and resuming a peace process under UN guidance. The Saudi Arabian cabinet broadly accepted the roadmap late last year. The Indian capital is bracing for worsening air quality as millions prepare to celebrate the Hindu festival of lights, Diwali. Several states have imposed strict regulations on firecrackers during festivities. But traditions are hard to break. South Asia correspondent Ellie Grounds reports from New Delhi.
Stocking up ahead of a big celebration. Millions of Indians here and around the world will celebrate Diwali today.
Since childhood, we have been celebrating Diwali, and it's all about being together and, of course, the decorations.
The way to celebrate? Lights and firecrackers. But the novelty comes at a cost, the smoke exacerbating an already severe air pollution problem. To combat the problem, the Delhi government has banned the sale of all firecrackers for the rest of the year. It is allowing the use of green firecrackers for 2 hours tonight, which supposedly produce 30% less particulate matter.
Green crackers are more expensive than normal crackers, by about 25%. But they are less harmful, so we prefer people to buy and burst green.
Some believe they're a responsible way to celebrate.
Even I'm telling my brother, let's not buy too much, let's buy only the green crackers and let's buy as minimum as possible.
But environmentalists say they're a scam.
So this is really strange that you are willing to say that, okay, so I'll give less poison to my child, less toxicity with less crackers or green crackers.
Despite the rules, you can still easily buy green crackers here in Delhi. Because the ban only came in at the start of last month, a lot of what is now technically contraband had already been bought, and vendors are openly selling it. And those who use them say Diwali shouldn't be demonised.
This is for one day. We celebrate this Diwali for one day only.
Ellie Grounds, ABC News, New Delhi.
As millions around the world mark Halloween tonight by donning their scariest or funniest costumes, in China there have been moves by authorities to crack down on the festival. At the weekend, Chinese police in Shanghai were detaining people wearing costumes, with some revelers saying they were even forced to remove their makeup at the police station. Others on social media claim those who were taken in were also required to register their names, ID and phone numbers before being released. And there has also been a visibly heavy police presence, with some streets lined with crowd control barriers and rows of police vans. Well, Bang Xiao from the ABC Chinese team says the youth in the country are using Halloween to express their anger over the current economic and social climate.
We've seen dozens of young people on the street of eastern city of Shanghai and Hangzhou were taken by the police while they were celebrating the Halloween during parades on some of the busiest streets in those two cities. And where we can see that young people were dressing up in a way in order to mock the Chinese economy, as well as the current situation where young people are finding themselves hard to find a job. So basically, there is a public sentiment from the younger generation expressing their disappointments to the future that the country provides to them.
And why does China feel threatened by that?
In China, public gathering and protest and parades in general are always considered as a high-risk activity that is threatening the stability of the Communist Party's regime. What we can see is that because the ongoing tightening up of public expression of different opinions against what the government has been talking about and addressing on the national level, young people who are feeling there is much less space for them to express themselves. And during this Halloween celebration, just similar to what has happened last year, the younger generation really has used some innovative and creative way to express their ideas and different opinion in the form of celebration. But apparently, from Beijing's perspective, this is just a way of young people showing disobedience and challenge to the regime.
We also saw those people who were detained. They were brought to the police station, their names were being taken, their ID numbers and their phone numbers were also recorded. Could they face any sort of punishment?
Yes, being taken by the police and recorded with their personal details was generally perceived as a way of police giving these young people a warning. Generally speaking, I think people who are going onto the street and celebrating Halloween in a way to show their disobedience could already predict that there could be possibly a risk of being taken by the police. For some serious offense, people could be potentially charged with picking quarrels and provoking troubles, which is a very special charge in China's law and regulation. But generally speaking, given that the vibe on social media is still about people being cynical about this without mentioning too much serious punishments, we don't predict that those young people will face a really serious consequence after that.
Okay, but what's been the response on the ground from the public, particularly the younger Chinese who you've been talking about, who are happy to embrace occasions such as Halloween?
Yes, Girish, I think young people are really feeling that they are having less oxygen to express themselves in the society where the Communist Party is just constantly tightening up freedom of speech. From online censorship, where people can no longer express themselves even behind a nickname, to protesting or having a fan parade like this, what we have seen happens in the weekends in Shanghai, really showed that people were not happy with where the Chinese society is, and they have these constant questions about where the country is heading towards, and also they are angry about there's no room for them to actually exercise the citizenship that they were entitled to, ruled by China's constitution and regulation.
Okay, Bang Xiao, really, really good to get your insights into this story. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, Girish.
Optus is being sued by the consumer watchdog over allegations of shocking sales conduct towards First Nations and other vulnerable customers. The ACCC claims people were sold products they did not need and could not afford, and then some were chased by debt collectors.
Tony Cork has uncovered allegations that Optus sold phones to First Nations customers who lived in areas with no network coverage.
I find that pretty outrageous that they were selling products and plans to people for phones that weren't going to work as soon as they got back home.
Now the regulator is suing Optus in the federal court.
We allege that Optus sales staff manipulated credit checks in order to oversell phones and plans to vulnerable consumers, and that they did so without undertaking coverage checks. In some cases, Optus then pursued debt collection activities.
The watchdog alleges Optus engaged in unconscionable conduct against about 430 customers, mostly in Darwin and Mount Isa in Queensland.
Many of these consumers were facing learning difficulties, were unemployed or financially dependent.
This is degrading at the highest level, as I see it, for people living with disability, but more important for our First Nations people.
It follows a case where Telstra was fined $50 million for targeting more than 100 Indigenous customers. This case will examine the role of Optus management.
We allege that Optus management in the sales, in effect, reporting levels, including senior management, became aware of the conduct and of the failures in the systems, but allowed the conduct to continue.
Optus has apologised. It's sacked or disciplined the staff involved, is repaying affected customers and is cooperating with the ACCC. Michael Atkin, ABC News.
Argentine authorities have arrested 4 people linked to the collapse of a hotel in a coastal city, which left at least 1 person dead. Those detained include a foreman and 3 workers involved in renovating the building before its collapse. Government officials confirmed they would be pursuing an investigation for homicide and negligent homicide. Rescue teams have been clearing debris and searching for 7 people who are still missing. Australia has been warned to expect an increase in weather disasters because of climate change, according to major new reports. It's found the world is only years away from breaching the Paris Climate Agreement. Here's the ABC's meteorologist, Tom Saunders.
Temperatures are rising at an increasing pace. That's according to the latest biannual State of the Climate report from the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO. It found Australia has now warmed 1.5 degrees since pre-industrial times, and that's leading to multiple impacts.
More extreme heat events, including heat waves and marine heat waves. We've seen a reduction in rainfall in the cooler months of the year across southern Australia and an increase in rainfall in the warmer months of the year.
And since Australia is warming faster than the global average, when the Paris target is breached in the coming decades, our temperatures will already be 2 degrees higher, while a 2-degree global increase would equate to a near 3-degree warming over Australia. And with hotter temperatures comes a more intense fire season, already up to 25 more dangerous fire days per year. We face more frequent droughts, although short-lived heavy rain is also increasing, raising the threat of urban flooding.
For each degree of global warming that we experience, the atmosphere can hold about 7% more water vapour.
But more than 90% of the extra heat is being absorbed by the oceans. Australia's seas are simmering at 1.08 degrees above pre-industrial times, and warmer seas are combining with melting ice sheets to raise sea levels up to 5 centimetres per decade along the New South Wales coast. According to climate scientists, the severity of future warming and impacts is solely dependent on emissions. And while the burning of fossil fuels has levelled off over the past decade, the report says the world is a long way from reducing greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere.
The Los Angeles Dodgers have won baseball's World Series after defeating the New York Yankees 7-6 in Game 5. The Yankees started strongly at their home stadium and led 5-0 after 3 innings. But the Dodgers staged a fight back and scored 5 runs of their own in the 5th inning. It was the Dodgers' 8th World Series win and their first since 2020.
I thank my players, their families, the coaching staff, training staff, ownership, scouting, player development, the fingerprints on Dodger Nation. This trophy belongs to everybody.
Well, all eyes are on one man after that Dodgers win. Shohei Ohtani is undoubtedly the center of the baseball world. Years of records, disappointments, and unrivaled performances have propelled him to stardom in the major league and around the globe.
The $700 million smile of a man at the top of his game. 7 years after leaving Japan for the US Major League, Shohei Ohtani finally has a World Series in hand. And the celebrations begin.
I'm honoured to be able to be part of a season where we played the longest and to be able to get to know this team. My first year and experience winning a World Series has been a tremendous honour.
The 30-year-old's journey has been watched well beyond the Dodgers' hometown LA.
He plays with such a pure heart, and his performance is amazing. But what I think is also amazing is that he is able to stay humble while playing so well. He's a role model for everyone and also makes us locals proud.
It's been a long time coming. After 6 grueling seasons at the Angels, Ohtani was a multiple MVP and home run leader of the league. But without a single postseason game to his name, baseball's biggest prize eluded him. Ohtani left 2023 a free agent with one goal: join a winning team and take home the World Series.
We couldn't be more thrilled to introduce the newest member of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani.
Ohtani joined the Dodgers with a record-setting contract and just as much scrutiny. That focus soon fell on a gambling scandal threatening to end his career in disgrace.
Mr. Mitsuhara used and abused that position of trust in order to plunder Mr. Ohtani's bank account to the tune of over $16 million. And Mr. Mitsuhara did all this to feed his insatiable appetite for illegal sports betting.
Betrayed by his interpreter, Ohtani kept lighting up the field. By season's end, he'd made the Major League's first ever combo of 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases. That's about when the phrase "greatest of all time" started getting thrown around. and when all eyes turned to the playoffs. Ohtani's whirlwind of homers drove the Dodgers to the World Series. Then in Game 2 against the Yankees, a shock injury, nearly bringing his season to a close.
Initially, I wasn't really exactly sure. I was really concerned about whether I was safe or out. It was only when I went back inside where we had to figure out what it was. The pain had subsided, so I felt pretty good about it.
A dislocated shoulder put Ohtani down, but not out. And when the Dodgers sealed the win in Game 5, baseball's biggest hit was right there with them. Angus McIntosh, ABC News.
You're watching The World, the top stories we are following tonight. The search continues for people still missing after flash flooding kills at least 95 people in Spain. Parts of Taiwan have shut down as Typhoon Kongray makes landfall, cutting power to nearly 500,000 homes. And Pacific leaders suggest an Australian-backed peacekeeping force could help maintain calm in New Caledonia. Let's return to our top story, and at least 95 people have been killed in the worst flooding disaster to hit Spain in decades. Torrential rain battered the eastern region of Valencia, gushing through streets, uprooting trees and sweeping away buildings. Europe correspondent Catherine Diss reports from Spain.
From the air, rescue crews scour a sea of mud for signs of life. This woman and her dog winched to safety just in time as floodwaters rapidly rise. Some clamber to rooftops to escape the torrent, hoping they'll be spotted. Cars and trucks no match for the wall of water. More than 400 millimetres of rain fell on parts of southeastern Spain in just a few hours on Tuesday, turning streets into gushing rivers. Large swathes of the region remain underwater. In darkness, rescuers started the hunt by boat and car. Some are lucky enough to walk away unscathed. Others had to be stretchered to safety. But the sheer scale of the disaster wouldn't become clear until morning.
Never before in history has there been so much rain. You can't even imagine the amount of rain that fell here yesterday.
It's a catastrophe. The floods we had in 1982 were a joke compared to what happened here yesterday.
The government has declared 3 days of mourning and warned the natural disaster isn't over yet.
The whole of Spain is crying with all of you. Our absolute priority is to help you. We ask citizens not to let their guard down. We cannot yet consider this devastating episode to be over.
But amid the heartbreak, tales of human survival are emerging. This elderly couple in their late 80s were remarkably found unhurt in the rubble. Such stories will boost morale in a region with tested resolve. But with many now questioning if the warnings came too late, grief and hope could quickly turn to anger. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Spain.
Pacific leaders have wrapped up a 3-day fact-finding mission to New Caledonia following deadly riots that broke out earlier this year. Authorities in France have insisted the tour was to gather information only and not have a mediation mission to try and find a way forward for the French territory. The ABC's Fiji reporter Lithe Mavono says one of the aspects of the mission was an aerial tour of the damage caused by the riots back in May.
The leaders did have a very thorough tour of Nouméa. What we understand is that they also had pocket meetings with various members of the community. They did speak with private sector, they did meet with the indigenous community, and they did also meet with representatives of the French government. But a highlight that I did hear from Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka is a tour by air to have a better vantage of the damage done in Nouméa since the May riots. And I spoke to the Prime Minister Rabuka last night, and he had this to say about the kind of damage they witnessed.
We saw it when we arrived, and we saw it again last night as we flew around in a gendarmerie helicopter. And it was sad to see the extent of the damage, and it was fairly evident from what we saw that it was a deliberate targeting of those businesses.
And that was the Fijian Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka. Lithe, it was difficult to get permission from France for the tour to even take place, and they insisted it was only for information purposes.
That's right. Ever since the riots in May, the Pacific Island Forum members, as well as the Troika, had made a few advances to the French government and to the administration in Nouméa for a visit. And this was further strengthened leading up to the August meeting of the Pacific Island Forum leaders, who had been preparing to send a Troika mission immediately after that meeting in Nuku'alofa in August. However, that was also delayed. And what we understand is that there were difficulties on the part of the French side as to what exactly it was that the leaders of the Pacific were there to do. But what we do know is that since the meeting has taken place, quite a lot of conversations are now happening in capitals of the Pacific as to what exactly the Pacific Island Forum can do to get both the indigenous New Caledonians and the French government to the table.
Yeah, and there's also been suggestions that the Australian-backed Pacific Policing Initiative could be deployed to New Caledonia as a peacekeeping measure. What's been the reaction to that?
Well, as of this afternoon, when we did manage to get through to the French embassy in Canberra, we understand that the French are not too excited about the idea of a Pacific police presence or Pacific security presence of any kind in Nouméa. The words, I think, that the French ambassador used were the French is capable of conducting its own security and defense measures in its French overseas territories. However, it is clear from our conversations with insiders in the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat here in Suva, as well as in our interviews with the Forum past Chair Mark Brown and Prime Minister Rabuka, that this is something that is on the table. The Pacific Island Forum, Vuvale, would like to reach out to its brothers in New Caledonia and offer some sort of peacekeeping force to help with the troubles there, Girish.
And what is the feeling on the ground in New Caledonia? What are people saying?
A false sense of calm. Those were the words said to the team that has been working on this story over the last few days. The presence of some 6,000 strong French troops in Nouméa is keeping the peace in the territory at the moment. But what we do understand from speaking with the prime ministers who were in the territory on the weekend is that there is still a lot of frustration. There are a lot of people that are looking to the French government for a more open and a more conciliatory approach to their calls for decolonization and self-determination.
And Lithe, also a big development in Fiji where you are, and there is a new president.
That's right. Today in the Parliament there was a special sitting to formalize the nomination and therefore the election of Ratu Naingama Lalambalavu. He is the paramount chief of the northern province of Vakundrove, but also head of one of the three main confederacies that leads the political and the leadership structure of the indigenous people. Ratu Naingama has been now elected to the position and will be sitting in the presidency by the end of November or early December. But he's not without controversy. Girish, there are a lot of opposition. There's a lot of civil society and human rights activists calling for a change in that nomination, but that has not occurred because today Ratu Naingama Lalambalavu will become Fiji's next president in a few short weeks.
Okay, Lithe Mavono in Suva, thanks very much. When students come to study in Australia, many find themselves in a rental trap, paying expensive prices in the private market or living in overcrowded accommodation. There just aren't enough beds on campus to house all university students, yet the push to provide more student accommodation is facing resistance.
Raj feels at home in his new Adelaide apartment, but his first experience renting as an international student was less than ideal.
It was a 4-bedroom house that had been converted to a 6-bedroom house. At one point, there were 9 people living in that house.
It's an all too common experience for those who come to study in Australia, where there isn't enough student accommodation.
International students are basically cash cows that are milked by the system.
With an election looming and rising political pressure, the government announced a cap of 145,000 international students for publicly funded universities, plus an incentive, go over the limit but provide more student housing.
If we can get more accommodation and more supply on, although it might be at the high end of the market, it puts downward pressure on pricing.
Universities have pushed back against the planned student caps, arguing the rental crisis isn't caused by the post-COVID influx of international students, but rather a chronic lack of housing supply. But getting approval for new developments isn't always straightforward. The University of New South Wales plan for student housing was fiercely opposed by the local council and neighbouring acting academy NIDA, which raised concerns about construction noise.
We already have in Randwick over 3,000 very expensive commercial student accommodation rooms already approved.
After initially being knocked back, the development was approved in September. The government is hoping to pass the legislation on student caps before Parliament breaks for the year. Nadia Daly, ABC News.
Patients are raising concerns about a lack of informed consent over the nation's most popular osteoporosis drug. They say not enough of them are being adequately informed of side effects or complications when coming off the drug.
Margaret Rhines had osteonecrosis of the jaw for 2 years, a painful condition that involves the death of bone cells due to decreased blood flow.
The pain will come on suddenly and it's so severe, all you want to do is go and lie down.
It's a side effect of the osteoporosis medication she was taking, but her specialist hadn't warned her. Osteoporosis reduces bone mass and density, making them fragile. Prolia, or denosumab, works by blocking cells that cause the bone loss. It's given by injection every 6 months, but a late or skip dose can make symptoms return, sometimes worse than before.
There is a small but significant risk of multiple spine fractures in patients who stop Prolia without any further preventative measures.
He co-authored a report finding most patients weren't offered those preventative measures. Some patients say it's an ongoing issue, and the advice gap means they weren't able to give informed consent.
We're just being told the side effects are rare, you can stop taking it any time, my mother is on it, if you don't take it, you will break a hip and die.
I think it's very important that anyone who prescribes or de-prescribes a drug for a patient has this conversation with them.
Patients want the regulator to add a black box warning to Prolia, something that's already happened in the US. But it and the drug's manufacturer Amgen say warnings are already listed on the product information leaflet. The RACGP insists Prolia is safe and effective and warns injury from osteoporosis can be deadly. Penny Timms, ABC News.
Returning to the United States now, where the flow of people across the southern border has become a major political issue, even thousands of kilometres away in the swing state of North Carolina. Adam Harvey reports.
Sheriff Sam Page is the law in Rockingham County, North Carolina.
You're violating the law and you're hurting people out in my community, I'm going after you.
His beat seems fairly sedate, at least compared to nearby cities.
We've had a few drive-by shootings. When you go to Greensboro, I mean, it seems like they have a murder every weekend.
But there is a drugs problem here, the synthetic opioid fentanyl.
I think we had, like I said last year, I think it was like 300 overdose calls across the county. And then, of course, I think we had 23 people die.
Sheriff Page says the source of North Carolina's fentanyl problem is 3,000 kilometres away on America's porous southern border.
What kind of crime do you see here that's related to the border?
The methamphetamines, the heroin, the fentanyl, any of the cocaine, they're selling those products. They're working for the cartel. It's not if, they are.
Sheriff Page has been campaigning for hardline immigration reform for 14 years.
2 million unknowns in our country. Nearly 180 countries represented coming to America illegally. And I worry what's going on right now will set us up for the next 9/11.
So prominent, he earned the recognition of Donald Trump.
Fantastic guy, Sheriff Sam Page. Where is the sheriff?
Sheriff Page believes the former president is the man to fix the border.
We're at war with the Mexican drug cartel, and the only way to stop that threat, and they're a terrorist organization as far as I'm concerned, because they're far worse, they're just as bad, if not worse, than ISIS and any organization, but they're regularly killing people in the United States. And this administration, current administration, doesn't seem to be offended by that situation.
Sophia was our second daughter out of 4, competitive, smart, fun-loving, and a foodie. She was a professional businesswoman, college graduate, and unfortunately, she's dead.
24-year-old Sophia Walsh died after drinking water at a friend's house that she did not know had been laced with fentanyl. Her mother, Barbara, tells Sophia's story to highlight the scale of the problem.
In North Carolina, we've lost over 18,000 residents to fentanyl in 10 years. And we were averaging 3,500 a year, 10 per day. That means 10 families like me and Mike lose a child every day.
She is careful not to take sides in the highly charged political debate about fentanyl.
Politics can help or hurt. And right now, I would like to see politics involved to help.
When it comes to fentanyl in this US election campaign, there is little nuance.
Millions of illegal immigrants, traffickers, and drugs coming into our country. Our country has gone to hell.
Ads like this play in almost every commercial break in the swing states. And in towns like Sheriff Page's Reedsville, they hit the mark.
What do you think will happen if Kamala Harris wins?
It's going to be a mess. The border's more people's going to come in. It's going to be more killings, more rape, children getting raped, human smuggling, more drugs coming through the border.
The incendiary language might be aimed at voters, but the fear that it stokes lands directly on North Carolina's migrant community, most of whom, of course, have nothing to do with drugs or gangs. They're here to work, and they're essential to the local economy because they're willing to do the kind of low-paid jobs that American citizens aren't.
When you see our community and you see their faces and you see the children and the moms and the families and the workers, and it's just like, I can't imagine people thinking those things.
Ileana Santillan came to America from Mexico as a child. Her family overstayed their visa, so she became an illegal immigrant. She is now a US citizen and works with North Carolina's Latino community, many of whom are terrified of the language being used by Donald Trump and his supporters.
I think the general sentiment is very, very scary, and we hope that that doesn't happen again, but we've seen deportations and raids at this scale in our state happen under a Trump administration.
For 23 years, Edith Pocastagui has lived in the US as an undocumented migrant.
What work do you do?
Picking strawberries, blueberries, then I moved to a factory where they packed strawberries and asparagus. It's a hard job.
While she's classified illegal, her American-born son, Andre, is not. With no papers and no driver's licence, Edith fears she'll be a target should Trump be re-elected. Every car trip risks an unwanted interaction with police.
It's scary to think that your mother or father, as kids, won't return. It's going to be a big fear within the Latin community.
Across North Carolina, there's a network of refuges called welcome houses, where immigrants like Diego help new migrants from across the world.
With the little English we know and what they've been able to learn, we've helped them adapt to life here.
Dr. Randy Carter is the director of the Welcome Network, which has helped hundreds of migrant families.
How do you feel about the weaponisation of the language around migrants?
It's dehumanizing. It's the idea that these folks are simply an issue to be dealt with, not human beings with lives and stories and loves and desires and fears. I think so often people focus on how they have arrived, but they have no idea from what they have come.
The network talks to locals about the migrants and why they're here.
Just relay their stories, their actual stories, and to say, you know, if you're going to lump all these people into this one story of something terrible, well, let me tell you a story of something beautiful and try to categorize more people around these beautiful stories.
David lives right across the road from this Raleigh welcome house.
We really enjoy having the families come through this houses, and it just, our neighborhood kids get together with the children coming through, and it's just a joy to see children at an early age getting to know one another from different parts of the world. And I really think that's what this country is about. You know, we're a nation of immigrants.
Cricket Australia has extended the contract of national men's test coach Andrew McDonald. His main challenge will be to renew the test team, with several big-name players due to retire in the coming years. Today, 3 of those potential opening batting hopefuls came undone as Australia A took on India A.
On the day Andrew McDonald's job was locked in until 2027,
we're more looking forward, I suppose, with the challenges ahead of us.
It was the future of ageing test stars like Steve Smith, Usman Khawaja and Mitch Starc that was the major talking point.
I think if you get the selections right on the back of players exiting, then the transition is a lot smoother.
So all eyes were on the action 2,000 kilometres to the north as Australia A took the field against India A, and it was the bowlers who starred. South Australian speedster Jordan Buckingham started the party with his first ball.
Down leg side. Has Philippi taken it? He has.
The wickets tumbled after lunch, with Brendan Doggett a standout.
Hard struck in front and out. Doggett has 5.
He later took a 6th before Fergus O'Neill wrapped up India A's innings for just 107, which set up the bat-off for Australia's vacant opening spot. New South Wales 19-year-old Sam Constas was given the first chance to push his test claims, but lasted just 3 balls.
Edged and out, so Constas is gone.
Cameron Bancroft's horror start to the season continued, out controversially for another duck.
Top of the thigh pad, absolutely.
Victorian hopeful Marcus Harris fell for just 17.
It's a poor shot from Harris.
It was left to captain and another test aspirant, Nathan McSweeney, to make a stand, scoring a patient 29 not out off 110 balls as the home side finished the day on 4 for 99. With 2 centuries already this season, he may have provided the selectors with the one answer they were looking for. David Mark, ABC News.
Richmond's Ailish Sheeran is free to play this weekend after the AFL failed in its appeal against her sanction for making contact with an umpire. Sheeran was sent straight to the tribunal for this incident in the 4th quarter of the Tigers' Dreamtime match against Essendon on Saturday. The club successfully argued her charge down from intentional contact with an umpire to careless, resulting in a $200 fine. Tonight, the appeals board backed that ruling, leaving the 2-time All-Australian available for the Tigers' final home and away match against Hawthorn on Sunday. The Tasmania Devils are urging the state's government to make a decision on where to build the team's new high-performance facility. Exploratory work on both the Rosny and Kingborough sites is now finished, but the clock is ticking towards Tasmania's entry into the AFL.
Very quickly, I know.
Reports, analysis and investigations into a new Devils High Performance Centre are officially complete. All that remains is a final decision from government on which site the new facility will be built.
We're at a point now where we feel the information is complete and it's time to take that next step and make the decision and make the announcement.
It's down to the club's preferred location at Rosny Parklands or its second choice, Kingborough, different sites but with the same criteria.
So that's everything from geotech, and that's the rock that sits under the grass or under the turf, through to environment, heritage.
Architecture firm Populous has won a more than $2 million design tender for the facility, but just where the government chooses to build it is now anybody's guess.
It's still under investigation and still being looked at, and when that decision has been made, we'll certainly be letting you know.
Builds at both sites are believed to be more than the budgeted $70 million, meaning bang for buck will be crucial.
We should have been already started by now, and in fact the contract says that they should have had the approvals 6 months ago. They should be starting construction now.
And the longer the wait, the higher the price.
Timing is obviously a critical one, and with timing comes cost, as I think we would all appreciate.
As the Devils' entry draws closer, North Melbourne's exit from Tasmania is happening quicker than anticipated. The Roos were contracted to play 4 games here in Hobart next year, but they'll now take 2 of those games to Western Australia instead. The beleaguered TT line is set to save hundreds of thousands in sponsorship costs. The remaining 2 Hobart Kangaroos fixtures also likely to feature higher profile opposition.
The focus should be on getting the right teams that are going to bring a big crowd and set Hobart alight. That's what I think everyone would like to see.
Chris Rowbottom, ABC News.
Australia's Diamonds have had a dominant 63 goals to 50 win over New Zealand in Melbourne to avoid a clean sweep in netball's Constellation Cup. After heavy losses in the first 3 games, the world champion Australia restored some pride. Goal shooter Sophie Garbin starred for the Diamonds with 36 goals from as many attempts. Australia's coach Tacey Marinkovic says her team played with the freedom that had been lacking in previous games. And let's recap our top stories before we go. A major search and rescue operation is underway in Spain after dramatic floods devastated Valencia region, killing at least 95 people. Taiwan on high alert as Typhoon Kongray makes landfall, cutting power to nearly 500,000 homes. And Pacific leaders suggest an Australian-backed peacekeeping force to maintain calm in New Caledonia. And that is your world for tonight. You can always watch the show on iView, and more world news and interviews can be found at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Girish Sawlani, wishing all our Hindu viewers a happy Diwali. So have a good one. I'll see you next week.